What's going on, guys? Junior's Fishing Company. Not with another tying video. After uploading like 140 videos, I started to go through and I realized I've never really uploaded a video kind of showcasing my favorite baits. And I've been having a pretty decent winter out on the ice, and so I thought today, instead of doing a tying video, I would just kind of show or showcase, or whatever you want to call it, my top favorite baits that I've been using over the last couple years. And so really I'm going to start at number 5, and then when I work my way up to number 1 is honestly, it's kind of a no-doubter, and it's really just been, I've really just been using that jig for the last year, but it's just been remarkably productive, especially for crappies. One jig that I have just absolutely fallen in love with just over the last year or two is just a horizontal pheasant tail jig. I've got a couple here that I'll show you, but pheasant tail fibers are really thin and they have really great action in the water. When you're making these with some of these slotted beads, the hole on the bead is really, really small, and so you can get away with using a lot bigger beads on a small hook. So this would probably be, I think this is a size 14 Daiichi 4647, but this is a 5/32 inch bead, which is a really big bead for a small hook like that. I would mainly fish a jig like this in shallow water. I fish a lot of shallow water in the winter where there's still weed growth, looking for green weeds and stuff like that. You'd be amazed at how many fish you can catch in 1.5 foot of ice in 6 feet of water. The only really downside to using jigs like this, I mean, really, pheasant tail just in general, is that it can be kind of delicate. And so a jig like this, I mean, if you're hammering them for a while, the tail and these wings, they'll start to get really frayed and they'll start to come off and stuff like that. Even with the wire wraps on that body, when it freezes and thaws and freezes and thaws, they get really brittle. And so jigs like this just don't last a super long time. Coming in at number 4, which it kind of broke my heart a little bit to put this at 4, because this over the last like 4 years, really these are some of the first I started tying, like 5 years ago when I really got into tying, are these chrominid patterns. I really just refer them to bloodworms because I use these primarily if I'm fishing basin crappie. You know, you're fishing 17 to 22 feet of water, and you're fishing over mud. What I think they're foraging on, these crappie that are swimming around in these basins, are just little bloodworms, little larvae that are popping out of the mud. And so this is to imitate those. It's a really small profile. I think both of these that I'm showing you are size 16 bead nymph hooks. So the weight on these is a 1/8 inch just tungsten bead. They're really light and small, so they're really great for picky fish. Now, if you're fishing in 20 feet of water and you're using something this light, it just takes a long time to get down to the fish. But really, you gotta kind of weigh your options, right? You don't want to drop a 1/4 ounce tungsten down there if they're being finicky. So that's why this is almost always on one of my panfish rods in the winter. I primarily use it deep, but I'll bust this out if I'm fishing shallow too, if the bite is really light. I drill tons of holes when I'm fishing. I'm not really a big sit and wait kind of guy. So if I'm hopping holes and I'm not going to be in my house, if the wind is light, this is tricky to use if there's heavy wind just because there's not much tension on your line. But if there isn't much wind and the bite is picky, this is one of the only jigs or baits that I'm going to use. Now, coming in at number 3 is something I've never really shown on this channel before, and I kind of I didn't really even realize I hadn't uploaded one of these videos before. So this at number 3 is just kind of your classic tungsten vertical jig, right? This is just a tungsten painted head. In this case, it's just kind of all black. There's a little bit of gold on the front of this jig. Obviously the eyes are white, but really the main thing I want to focus on is these little small plastics. The amount of small panfish plastics they have these days is crazy. I mean, it's almost comparable to bass. But one of the first things I got into when I started making baits and stuff like that, like 10 years ago, was I started pouring my own soft plastics Do It molds makes great aluminum molds. They're a little expensive, but they're super durable. They're long lasting. So this, I think this is like an ice pick. I think that's what it's called. It comes in just a 2-piece mold like this. You just need an injector that you inject your soft plastic into. I think I'm going to do probably a video, I don't know if I'm going to do it this winter, maybe in the spring or something like that, because I do have a couple crayfish molds too. But this is a great way to kind of have a soft plastic that those fish haven't seen a lot, because the fish see all of this different stuff. But if you have something like this, and you can pick any color that you want, you can add glitter, you can add scent, you can do all this different stuff, you can add salt. So it's a great way to just customize your bait. So I poured this little ice pick plastic is just black with a little bit of silver flake in it. These are super heavy, so if you are fishing in 16 feet of water and the fish are on the bottom, you can get down to these fish in a snap. And so I'll fish this shallow, I'll fish it deep. There's a billion different colors. I mean, most guys have a bin full of these little tungsten or lead jigs that they use for panfish. This is really just kind of a classic staple. I couldn't make a top 5 list without putting just a classic horizontal jig on here. Alright, so coming in at number 2 is, it was hard not to put this at number 1, because over the last probably 3 or 4 years, I have caught more fish on this jig than I've caught on any other, probably 2 to 1. This is a Heas SOS. I just uploaded a SOS video maybe a month or so ago, I don't know, 6 weeks. I also uploaded one, I think, last winter too, and I'll continue to upload these because there's so many different options that you can do when you're tying these. I think this is probably a size 14 with a 5/32 on there, tungsten bead. With how many styles this can be tied in, and really the thing for me is it imitates so much stuff. When I'm fishing shallow or I'm fishing deep, the one thing I really have on my mind is what are they eating and what can I throw or jig with or cast with or whatever that's going to imitate what they're feeding on, because in my opinion that's just going to be the best way to do it. The SOS just does, it just imitates all of these different things. This is, when in terms of ice fishing, this is more of a vertical presentation instead of a horizontal presentation, but it's heavy, it gets down deep if you're fishing deep. If you're in the weeds, it's plenty heavy to punch through weeds. You can jig around stuff, and they're super durable too. I can't tell you how many Heas SOSs I have that I'll use multiple times when I go out fishing. If that's the color that's working and I really don't have any in other sizes or anything like that, I can easily fish multiple days with just a single bait. And this over any other, I probably have more SOSs in my arsenal than I do any other bait. This is just one of my little, these are just little clam bait boxes or whatever. I mean, I've got like 6 rows of Heas SOSs in here for good reason. I mean, they're just super versatile. It's just a classic, awesome pattern. Now, coming in at number 1 is just a bait I've really just been using maybe a year now. I think I uploaded the video, I think it was mid or late January, so it was about a year ago, and this has probably been the most productive crappie jig I've ever used that I can remember. It's just really just a micro streamer. I think this one's probably 1.25 inches or so, and it's got a really light bead on here. What I try to do is I try to tie these similar size but with different bead sizes, because if I'm fishing in deep water, I'm going to want to use a heavier jig, a heavier bait, just to get down a little faster. But what this imitates is just a lonely little minnow that's on its own, and it's just easy prey for any fish. The one thing I try to focus on when I'm making these is to use a really small hook. This is a size, I think this might be a 16 Hannock or something like that. I use really small hooks with small gaps, and that's why the Daiichi 4647 is probably my favorite jig out there, because it has a small gap. So when you're fishing, I mean, even an 8 to 10 inch bluegill doesn't have a huge mouth. I mean, a 7-inch crappie has a bigger mouth than a 10-inch bluegill. So when you're fishing, even for big bluegill, in my opinion, you want to use something that the fish is going to be able to fit into its mouth. These things are crazy durable. I've jigged these, again, just like the SOS, I'll jig these until the eyes fall off and then I'll keep fishing with them. It's like those old school Rapala baits that you keep throwing even though the balsa wood on the inside is starting to show. The action and movement on these tails with, I mean, there's a ton of different dubbings that you could use. Bruiser Blend Jr. are awesome dubbings. Senyo's Laser Dub is really good too. There's a ton of great dubbings out there, but the action on this when you're just sitting there, you know, you're fishing it straight down through an ice hole, but you're jigging it and it's just sitting there just looking like this little minnow that's just begging to get eaten. I'm just showing you, I just tied this one up a couple days ago. This is just a chartreuse with red eyes. So there you have it. My top 5 favorite panfish jigs, especially in the winter. You could definitely use these in the summer too, but a horizontal pheasant jig, a chronomid, bloodworm, whatever you want to call it, vertical tungsten jig with a plastic hooked on it, an SOS, and a mini minnow, micro streamer, whatever you want to call it. These 5 jigs are as productive as anything else out there. I'll put money on it. Junior's Fishing Company. Like and subscribe, drop comments below if I left something off this list. I almost did a top 10 list, but that'd probably be a 2-hour video because I just babble and babble and babble. So I just whittled it down to my top 5, and there was a bunch that I really wanted to add, but my top 5 jigs, tie them up, reel them in. See you in the next one.